Hello and welcome to News Central Television. I am Lekon Onobanjo. Here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. The news begins in the United States, where the judge in Donald Trump's criminal hush money case has ordered that sentencing be delayed indefinitely. This is a legal win for the president-elect as he prepares to return to the White House. Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts in May after a jury found he had fraudulently manipulated business records to cover up an alleged sexual encounter with a porn star ahead of the 2016 election. Prosecutors argue that concealing the alleged tryst was intended to help him win his first run for the White House. Staying in the U.S., President-elect Donald Trump has named former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi as his new choice to run the Justice Department. This comes hours after his first pick to run the nation's top law enforcement agency, Matt Gaetz, dropped out. Gaetz stepped aside amid continued fallout over a federal sex trafficking investigation that cast doubt on his ability to be confirmed as the nation's chief federal law enforcement officer. Bondi has been an outspoken defender of Trump and was one of his lawyers during his first impeachment trial when he was accused, but was not convicted of abusing his power as he tried to condition U.S. military assistance to Ukraine on what a country investigating then former Vice President Joe Biden. Now, joining us on the news to discuss more on these appointments, how it would actually affect Africa, is an author and a senior specialist on humanitarian affairs, Professor Mukesh Kapila. Thank you so much, Professor Kapila, for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So how might the appointment of the hardline figures like, Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and the latest Bondi affects the migration patterns of Africans to the United States, especially in terms of asylum seeking and undocumented immigration?
I don't think the individual names of Trump nominees really matter, because they're all being selected on the basis of their personal loyalty to him. This is what is different from his first administration. But in terms of your question about migration, the Trump view is been very clearly stated, and that is that he wants to minimize migration, and especially illegal or irregular migration. And that's why a number of measures are to be expected, which will make it very difficult for migrants to get into the United States. And for those who are there already, they may well find themselves on the way out. Now, as far as Africa is concerned, actually, while the numbers of irregular migrants from Africa have increased in recent years, they are really not particularly significant in terms of the total amount of migration into America. Nevertheless, I think they're going to get caught up in all of this. And then in terms of legal migration, that is those who are going for legitimate purposes, including seeking asylum, refugees from war zones and so on, I think it's going to be harder, much harder for them.
Okay, so when we talk about justice reforms, anti-corruption crusade, combating transnational crime, do you think the leadership of Pam Bondi would be willing to work with Africans along this line? Because the normal narrative has always been America first.
Well, I think precisely the Africa first policy means that they will work with anyone and any country in any continent that is going to be a good partner to them in advancing American interests. What that means is that they're not going to be looking at Africa as a continent as a whole. And I don't think the African Union, for example, as a multilateral organization, will be particularly effective or useful in speaking for the continent of Africa. It will be individual countries that are going to have to build up bilateral relationships in any sector, be it justice, be it business, be it trade. And what that means is that Africans will need to be aware of a divide and rule environment that is going to possibly do competition within African countries. And I think if this means a tougher action on corruption, which is very prevalent in Africa, then that is no bad thing. But overall, I think it's a bit mixed picture as to what's going to happen.
Okay, so how do you now think, African civil society organizations should be better prepared, or how can they prepare themselves when you look at the potential shifts in U.S. policy, most especially under Bondi's leadership? We're talking about strategies that might be employed that can help them advocate for better interests, of course, in the face of this new U.S. dispensation.
Well, we know that the Trump administration is not enamored, for example, of population-related policies like family planning, like HIV, like reproductive health. And generally speaking, I think you may expect its aid budget to be restricted. What that means is that African civil society organizations that are dependent on project funds, on grants from the American government through USAID and others, they will actually face hardship. And of course, if civil society organizations in Africa are involved in democracy and in human rights promotion, then I'm not sure that the Americans will be that much interested. But quite honestly, it is time that we had African civil society finding African solutions to African challenges and not constantly becoming donor dependent and being driven by the donors. So they should look upon this as an opportunity to come of age and stop looking to donors. And African civil society should be African grown and work according to African values and principles, not be dictated by the Americans or any other donors.
And you would expect, solutions to come by for vulnerable migrants from Africa who are probably currently facing mass deportation issues and discrimination in the U.S. Now, for those in that category, what would you advocate for them?
Well, it's important for African organizations, governments as well as civil society organizations, to build good alliances with progressive democratic, I don't mean Democratic Party, I mean democratic
solutions,
in a sort of sense, elements in the US, because so that when the legitimate rights of people of African origin are subverted, that they can stand up. I think one thing we do know about Trump is that if you stand up to him, it's hard, and but he also respects people who take a principled position, even if he disagrees with you. So the important thing is not to kowtow to him, not to just say what he wants, as some African governments are already starting to do. They're out-trumping Trump himself in terms of their trying to get close to him. And I think that would be an extremely wrong attitude, either for African governments or for African civil society organizations.
All right, Professor Mukesh Kapila, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate that.
Thank you.